Thank you, Councilmember Pulaski, and for everyone else having me up here. I know many of us think rail and Summit's just New Jersey Transit delays and all the like, but I do persist that there is a lot of hidden secret in history to our railways and Summit. So if we begin. Our story starts over 200 years ago. The Morristown and Essex Railway's extension from its terminal station in Newark to Morristown crossed through Summit at milepost 22, beginning on January 1st, 1838. The current Summit station, as we all know it, was constructed between 1904 and 1905 by the M&E. The tracks were always sunk 16 feet below ground in the infamous mile-long cut, which still remains today. The Morristown and Essex Railroad was acquired by the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western in 1868, retaining control over this line and its service. At street level, however, a now long-lost track was initially constructed to the Passaic and Delaware branch of the M&E Railway. This spur was the only section of the failed New Jersey West Line Railroad, a greater plan to connect the state via rail, to be constructed between Summit and Bernardsville. The DL&W, now supervising the Morristown and Essex operations, took over this branch in 1882, extended service to Gladstone, where it remains as a branch line today. Simultaneously, across Broad Street, the third extension of the Rahway Valley Railroad opened in Summit on July 26, 1906 from Roselle Park, with passenger service beginning a week later. This short line, much smaller in size and scope than the DL&W, serviced freight and passengers throughout the region. It constructed its competing terminal station at the base of Overlook Mountain adjacent to Broad Street, now occupied by the most recent stretch of the Park Line, which opened recently. The terminal station at Summit, now demolished, consisted of a 3-track yard, a passenger building and ticket office, and a water tower for its steam locomotives. The construction of this Rahway Valley line into Summit, however, was not without issues. When initially constructing the line, the Rahway Valley's illegal street encroachment onto the Ashwood Avenue Bridge, still present today, caused city officials to tear it down overnight in protest. A New York Times article dated October 7, 1905, under the title Pugnacious Summit, details how city councilmen met secretly to agree to tearing the bridge down, with the city's steamroller pulling the iron supports to the street with a chain. The Rahway Valley, however, could not stay out of legal trouble within the city. Summit was chosen for Rahway's terminus because of its attractive connection to the DL&W, its route, and its customers. The DL&W rejected an initial proposition to connect the railroads in the fall of 1906. It is interesting to note that while the bridge over Broad Street, then called Park Avenue, was built in 1906 with its initial construction into Summit, it is unclear how much this bridge was used before the connection was finally established later on in the century. With the help of Summit-based lawyer Elmer McKiergan, the Rahway Valley took the matter to the Interstate Commerce Commission. On June 24, 1908, the ICC ordered the railways to connect. The DL&W, however, was still not taking it. In addition to physically blocking the Rahway Valley workers from finishing the connection by placing locomotives on the stub end of its yard track to connect the two railroads, their appeal with the U.S. Circuit Court was successful in October of 1908, with the Circuit Court trumping the ICC's order for a connection, therefore ceasing this agreement and ordering the railways to stay separate. Finally, the matter escalated to the Supreme Court. On March 7, 1910, in the case of ICC versus DL&W, Justice Oliver Holmes ruled in favor of the Lackawanna, stating that the DL&W can block such a connection because the Rahway Valley is, quote, not a lateral branch line of railroad, and is therefore too large to force a connection. Ultimately, a connection was formed under the economic pressure of the Great Depression in March of 1930. Additional tracks were constructed at Summit Yard to connect the two railways and switch cars between the two. Rail service in the Rahway Valley and Summit ceased in April 1976, with trackage abandoned soon after. Service continued along the DL&W throughout the 20th century. In addition to its frequent commuter service to Hoboken Terminal, the Lackawanna also ran a series of long-distance trains through Summit and further west to Scranton, Buffalo, Chicago, and Cleveland. In 1960, the Lackawanna and Erie railroads merged to form the Erie-Lackawanna. And it's interesting to note that the colors of this railroad were maroon and gold, which I can neither confirm nor deny. I have a link to our town's colors and the high school colors as well. As the century drew to a close, New Jersey Transit took over the EL's commuter service in 1983, keeping rail service from Summit relatively similar to where it stands today. In 1996, the CUNY connection allowed the Morristown-Essex line to fly over the Northeast Corridor tracks and connect into Penn Station. Before this, service of Morristown-Essex would only run into Hoboken. While commuter service may seem mundane today, there's still much to consider in routing the rails. Our original M&E station remains in the National Register of Historic Places. Summit Tower is still visible from the east end of the platforms closest to New York City. You may have seen it and never known what it was for, but it's where railway crews used to pick up their way bills before departing with their freight cars across the state. The elevated track in Summit Yard, which you can see leaving the station east towards New York City, was the connection between the two railroads. If you look closely out of the parking lot of the Solano Duane, you can visualize the alignment of this connection with a now lost bridge over Broad Street, which was demolished in 1992 to make height for cars. Remnants of railway bridges can still be seen at Ashwood Avenue and Russell Place. And of course, the Summit Park Line follows the route of this abandoned railroad as it snakes its way through town. The history of Summit's rail, however, is still being written. Proposed Amtrak service from New York to Scranton will run through Summit along the abandoned Lackawanna Cutoff across the Water Gap. This will, yet again, write another chapter in the often overlooked history of Summit's railroads. Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.